Hello everyone, this is John from RPGs and More, and today I want to do a video to talk a little bit more about the Cypher system. This is something that has been asked for, and so I deliver. Now, what I want to discuss with regards to Cypher system for right now is how do you create an adventure for the Cypher system? How do you create encounters or, a dungeon, if you will? And there's one key component to this. There's something that's very, very important. You can ignore almost everything else about Cypher system except for this one thing. Now, so I'm going to go over it with you right now. First off, I'm using the second edition Cypher system rulebook, seen here. And what I'm talking about is found on page 208 in the the rules chapter, part 2 rules, chapter 11, rules of the game, page 208. And that is the task difficulty chart. The task difficulty chart, or table, if you will. And what this does is it lists the difficulty number for a task. It gives an example description of how difficult that task is expected to be. It gives a target number for completing that task, and then it gives a guidance, which is kind of like suggestions for how to go about doing this. So we'll talk for a little bit about each of these things in this video. Task difficulty is a number that is established between 0 and 10. Now, the descriptors for these, 0 is described as routine. Simple, or number 1, difficulty 1 is simple. Difficulty 2 is standard. Difficulty 3 is demanding. Difficulty 4 is difficult. Difficulty 5 is challenging. Difficulty 6 is intimidating. Difficulty 7 is formidable. Difficulty 8 is heroic. Difficulty 9 is immortal. And difficulty 10 is impossible. Now, the respective target numbers for these difficulties. These are the numbers that when your players wish to attempt a task and you've assigned it a difficulty number, these target numbers are the numbers that they have to roll equal to or higher than in order to complete the task, whatever task that is. Now, in core Cypher system, whenever you have an asset to a roll, you lower this target number by 1 task difficulty stage. So with a asset, a difficulty 4 task becomes a difficulty 3 task, or a difficult task simply becomes demanding. You'll see when I read these numbers that really it comes down to adding or subtracting 3 each time. What this means is if you're like me and you're coming from a more, D&D centered mindset where, you add and subtract bonuses and modifiers as a player in order to calculate, what your final bonus is, and then you roll a d20 add in your bonuses, and that's the number that you give the DM. Normally with Cypher system, you don't do that. You simply roll your die and then give the DM that number, and then the DM does all the math of, you say like, I'm rolling, I rolled a 14 and I've got 3 assets and 1 detriment, so that comes out to 2 assets. So then the DM does all the math for you in their head usually, and then tells you if you pass the target number that they have set or not. because they're the ones moving that target number up or down, the different levels, depending on how many assets you've used when it goes down, or how many detriments are involved, or difficulties, making it harder to make the numbers go up. You can eliminate all that as the DM, at least eliminate for yourself, simply by counting everything as a +3 or a -3. So let me illustrate that by reading these numbers out to you. Okay, so difficulty task 0, target number is 0. It's a routine task. You don't need to roll for it. Unless there are so many negative modifiers added to this to cause it to become, to go from a 0 to something else, you should not need to roll for a task difficulty 0 task. Now, one times where you might is, let's say it's a completely routine task, such as walking down the street. But because we're walking down the street and there's a tornado going on and an earthquake at the same time, and there's debris flying everywhere, and there's a cow, whoop, look at that, all these things going on, that adds levels of difficulty to a task of, I'm going out to like my mailbox or walking down to the neighbors. And suddenly that becomes a much more dangerous task, and you would increase the difficulty in that sense. Those are ways that you can make things more difficult, but really, I would, frankly, if you're going to have that much stuff happen, you'd be setting that difficulty higher to begin with. You shouldn't be calculating those modifiers on the fly. All right. So that's difficulty 0. Difficulty 1 is 3, target number 3. So whatever they roll, as long as they roll 3 or higher, they succeed. Target number 2, 6. Target number 3, 9. You're getting the idea. All the way to difficulty 10, impossible task. The target number is 30. 30 is normally impossible to roll on a 20-sided die unless you've got a ton of assets adding to your roll. All right. Give a little guidance for some of these. Difficulty 0 is anyone can do this basically every time. Anyone can. Number 1 is most people can do this most of the time. Number two, target number 6. Typical task requiring focus, but most people can usually do this. Task difficulty 3, target number 9, requires full attention. Most people have a 50-50 chance to succeed. So that should be your kind of your, it's a demanding task, especially for starting characters. I wouldn't set too many difficulties higher than this, strictly because you want to give them a chance to succeed. You want them to be heroic, right? All right. From there, we go to difficulty 4, which is difficult, and that is 12. Trained people have a 50-50 chance to succeed. Okay. 5 is challenging, or at a 15 target number. Even trained people often fail at this task. 15, that means that really you have a 75% failure chance on a 20-sided die with no modifiers. Okay? 6, intimidating. Target number 18. Normal people almost never succeed. 7, formidable. 21, impossible without skills or great effort. 8, heroic. 24, a task worthy of tales told for years afterwards. 9, immortal. 27, a task worthy of legends that last lifetimes. And then task difficulty 10, impossible, target number 30, a task that normal humans couldn't consider, but one that doesn't break the laws of physics. Okay. Now here's how this plays into creating an encounter or a dungeon. Now I am a big fan of Runehammer and Hankering for a Nail over at Runehammer, as well as Professor Dungeon Master over at Dungeon Craft. One of the things that both of them talk about when designing adventures or modifying adventures in order to fit into your game is setting a difficulty number for a room when you're designing something. Let's say you draw out, let's say you're drawing a tavern that you want your player characters to frequent. Maybe they're starting in the tavern, and maybe one of the things that happens is the tavern keeper comes out, excuse me, and says, "Oh my gosh, there's these big rats in the basement. I need some heroes to go and clear them out for me. Hey, by the way, you look like heroes. Why don't you do this task and then free drinks for the rest of the night for you?" Well, most heroes might, especially if they're a bit hard up on money, might say, "Okay, well, we'll," and maybe they'll, try to sweeten the deal a little bit. But most people would probably realize that if we get to drink as much as we want for the rest of the night, that's a lot of money. I'll take that. That's free booze and food, because most taverns back then would have food as well, sometimes actually. That's a good deal. So let's work on that basement. This is going to be a basement. It's going to be barrels in there, crates filled with smoked meats maybe, or other sundry foodstuffs that the tavern hasn't served yet. There might be some smoked meats hanging from the ceiling on hooks, whatever system the tavern keeper decides to use, depending on climate and culture and what have you. So you've got all these things, and you kind of map them out on your piece of paper, and then you decide, okay, how difficult do I want killing these rats to be? Now, it's an innkeeper or a tavern keeper. They're not doing it themselves, so this isn't going to be a normal or mundane task. But they're not necessarily rushing out the door to go and fetch the local constable and calling up the militia to deal with this big old threat. So I don't think that we'd call it a demanding task. It seems like it would fall more into a standard or simple task, but we'll go with standard, because killing big rats with a sword or a spear is probably, I haven't tried it, but I imagine that if the rats are big enough that it'd just be a matter of time and effort, and not necessarily a lot of skill, just putting the time in to get it done. So we'll go with standard, which means we're using the target number 6 for this task. And what that means is that any task that the heroes attempt while within this basement for this encounter is going to have the target number of 6. They try to, attack a rat, target number 6. They try to defend themselves from a rat's attack, target number 6. They try to knock over one of the big barrels to squish a rat with it, target number 6. They want to take off one of the hooks and use it to block up one of the rat holes so the rats can't escape, target number 6, to pull it off. Pretty much any task that they come up with, you just have them roll for it, and the target number is 6. You don't have to tell them that it's all the same. In fact, in some cases, it's better if you don't. But all tasks, target number 6 in that room. And it keeps the math easy, because they can do all the shenanigans they want. They can spend effort. They can spend their points from their pools in order to make sure that I just really desperately need to hit. I can't miss, and that they probably would hit anyway. But if they spend that one level of effort, then suddenly they go from having to target number 6 to target number 3. or they get a +3 to their roll, and that makes it even easier for them, and that's okay. Like, this is a great training scenario. This is a great scenario to get a bunch of new players and or new characters up and running as an adventurer, and it's done lickety split right there, because at this point they can come up with any other solution with this problem that they want to. You already have a target number for it. So all you've got to do is figure out, can they do what they're talking about? Or is what they're talking about impossible given the location and what you provided in that room? So you can focus on what physically is in the room and what is available in the location, and how the NPC, the tavern keeper, or the tavern keeper's serving people, how they feel and react to different things. Maybe the players decide, you know what, we're just going to go and find a couple of dogs and let the dogs loose in the basement. You know what? You can do that and simply say, well, target number 6 to try to find some dogs, and keep it rolling. You don't have to bog it down. Or maybe you decide, I want that to be a little bit harder because that's the easy way out, and I don't like that. It's also a little boring. So that turns into the adventure. The adventure becomes finding the dogs, and maybe that's still target number 6 as they go and search the town trying to find a couple of stray dogs, or someone who owns dogs that would be willing to, share the reward. Except maybe that person decides, you know what, you used my dogs and I had to come because they're my dogs, so I'm just going to take the reward for myself. And the tavern keeper would probably agree with that and simply say, yeah, you didn't really do anything except talk. So they get the reward and you guys can pay your bill. By the way, you owe me, 5 silvers. But that's the kind of the idea is, you can focus on the story because this difficulty task and the target numbers are all you really need. In fact, I actually would say the task difficulty number, the 0 to 10, you don't even need that number necessarily. You just need the target number. Now, what you can use that task difficulty number for is for deciding how much damage an attack from one of these creatures is going to do. So let's say target number 6, that's difficulty number 2. So any rat that successfully bites a character would deal 2 damage. That's pretty much one thing you can use for that. You can also say that number also equals the armor that the rats have on their body, if you choose to do so. You can decide rats have no armor and therefore they absorb no damage, because that's also fair. Generally, I would not have most monsters carry a lot of armor and just go with that, because the other thing is that task difficulty also becomes the health of whatever monster you're trying to throw at your opponents. Oh, sorry, not your opponents, but your players. Please, they're players and they're not opponents. This is not a versus thing here. It's a collaborative storytelling event. At least at my tables it is. I try not to make things versus each other, even though I sometimes use that language. It's a holdover from my Pathfinder days. All right. So that's what we do. That's what we can do. So like each rat has 6 hit points. And so they do 6 health and they kill the rat. So that might take, on average, 2 to 3 hits from a medium weapon or a heavy weapon. Okay? If you wanted to, say, add something like there's a secret passage in that room, that's also target number 6 to find it, because it's in the room. But then once it's found, it could lead somewhere else. Now, if you really wanted to, you could say that one thing is target number 9. A little harder to find. Something that's the tavern keeper probably missed or just didn't think it was anything worth worrying about. The secret passage was secret enough that they just didn't notice. Fine. The players happen to notice and say, that one wall sconce just looks funny. And then they turn it in the right combination, or, they describe their characters checking it. Maybe they turned it in the right combination of things and they unlock the secret door. and then they find themselves in another room that the tavern keeper maybe didn't know about, or maybe the tavern keeper did know about it, was hoping no one else would find it, because the tavern keeper is secretly a necromancer. Wah! But for that new room, you set a new target number. That's target number 9. So now everything in that room, maybe that this tavern keeper, now necromancer, has a secret, bone golem that they've been working on, and it's not quite finished yet, but then it comes to life because the player characters barge in there and set off the alarms, and suddenly they're dealing with this bone golem. And you can just sit there and describe it because you already know, because you've set it to target number 9, the bone golem has 9 hit points. Everything that it does is target number 9, and if it hits, it's going to deal 3 damage. And then you can decide if you want it to have 1, 2, or 3 points of armor. Or none. I'd go with none, personally, because it's an unfinished golem, and again, this is a learning adventure, so you don't want to run the risk of bamboozling your player characters or making them feel like they're not heroes. But maybe you do, and maybe you want this to be a harder fight. This is like a boss monster. But that's how easy it is to do that. And that's why this one chart on page 208 is, for me, the core of Cypher system dungeon or encounter development. Everything else, all the monsters in here, that's gravy. That's icing on the cake. All those special abilities, like you can use those. I encourage you to use those. I encourage you to read all that stuff and learn how all that works, because there's a lot of rules in this book, and this book is fantastic for that. But all you need is right there. Everything else dovetails from it. Everything else builds on it. So thank you for joining me today to learn about how to build a dungeon or an encounter for the Cypher system. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did enjoy this content, please give me a like the video, maybe subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. Let me know if you want more Cypher system content. Now that we've talked about, the core of how to build a dungeon, I wouldn't mind actually going over a physical, showing you a process of building a dungeon as I write things out. I could design the dungeon that Gerard from the earlier video is going to be going through, and then maybe we'll go through it together, or maybe we'll design it as we go, and I'll do a short series of videos on that, because that would be fun for me too. Let me know if you're interested in that. Either way, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you again, and peace be with you. Bye-bye.